So Continental made a big splash with their new mountain bike tire lineup. I've heard great things about the downhill tires specifically. They've had great success on the World Cup circuit and have positive reviews from riders I trust. But I haven't heard too much about the Enduro casing. And I mean, that's the meat of the tire range from a consumer's perspective. It's great if your downhill tires work well, but I was really curious how the Enduro tires held up for the majority of consumers out there who are looking for mountain bike tires. So it's obvious they kind of built off of the same tread pattern concept as the Assegai and DHR. So for a lot of this video, I'm going to be comparing it to that benchmark that hopefully a lot of you guys have experience with. And casing wise, I'll be comparing it to the double down casing and the Exo Plus in Maxxis's lineup. So I'll start by talking about the casing because for me, that's kind of where my experience with this tire builds off of and was the thing that kind of took me the longest to understand. At the end of the day, this Enduro casing is a much lighter casing than I initially anticipated. Comparing it to the Maxxis Double Down, it's just lighter. It just doesn't have as much support. So weight-wise, like a Cryptotol front, kind of the Assegai similar tire is 1,165 grams in the Enduro casing. An Assegai Double Down is 1,370 grams. So that's a massive weight difference. And then if you go to a DHR, which is maybe a little bit more comparable because it's in the 2.4 size, the DHR Double Down is 1,222 grams. And again, the Cryptotol RE is 1,165. So just weight-wise, much lighter than the Double Down tires, and it definitely comes across on the trail. I originally ran the trail casing up front. I actually rode Whistler and did the Hot Laps Enduro race on it, and man, that tire was so sketchy to ride at speed. Like, that front tire for gravity-oriented riding is almost unrideable. Like, the trail casing was like burping when I would land jumps really hard. And then like in corners, like my limit to how hard I could hit the corner was the front tire burping. So I wouldn't treat it like an Exo Plus. Like the trail casing is straight up Exo or lighter. And then this Enduro casing is, in my opinion, more of like a Trail Plus casing. It kind of strikes a cool ground that's almost lives maybe in between Exo Plus and Double Down, but it feels different than both of them. Where it seems heavy enough to like take on some more aggressive riding, but at the end of the day, for me personally, the support in the casing was really hard to get a feel for. And maybe it wouldn't be so much of an issue, but kind of pairing it with the tread compound and tread pattern really made it tough for me to get a feel for the tires, especially the front tire. It's actually not so much an issue in the rear at all, but the way the tread profile of the tire is fairly square. And on these corner knobs, it's like you almost have an offset angle where one is kind of more angled outward and then the other is like fairly square. But being that it's a 2.4 in a really like square profile, it makes it a little less forgiving when you're putting it on lean angle. But then when you combine it with this compound, which is, they call it a soft compound, but again, if I compare it to Max Terra from Maxxis, this is definitely harder than Max Terra. And these side knobs, how they're lugged, combined with the compound, just make them super, super stiff. So I don't feel like this tire is conforming to the terrain. I mean, hardly at all. It's like very rigid. So from it has decent traction, but I just struggle so much to get good feel out of this tire, especially on loose over hard pack. Like, I just really have a tough time trusting it. And then when you combine this casing that's fairly light and malleable with this super stiff lugged side knob, I almost get the feeling that like when I'm leaning the bike and putting a lot of load, especially into the front tire, like the casing is deforming before the knob, which is not a confidence inspiring feeling. And then I end up having to run like higher pressures to get away from that casing squirm. And then I feel like I'm in this zone where I'm not maximizing the traction from the tire. It's called Enduro casing soft compound. So in your head, you might think, oh, that's comparable to a double down max grip. And it's like, no, it's actually more comparable to like an XO Plus with a harder compound than Max Terra. And then when you combine this with this tread pattern that's like a smaller volume and a more lugged out side knob, in my opinion, it makes it kind of tough to ride in like loose over hard pack, even hard pack, I don't know. I did ride these tires in the wet, and like when they have some soil to penetrate, even though the compound's really hard, they hook up pretty good. Like I was able to run that trail casing front tire with the hard compound. I got third at the Hot Laps Enduro race, which was kind of slimy and wet. And I mean, I felt like I was on an ice rink. So I was able to manage it somehow with a ton of pressure in my tires to get the casing to hold up. But, you know, I guess you can do it. It just didn't feel that good while I was racing. And to briefly comment on the hard compound, which I was running on the front with that trail casing tire, I mean, it's almost like plastic. Like I rode it at the Whistler Bike Park, Hot Laps, a bunch of other trails, and like the rubber is unfazed. It looks unused. And even with the soft compound, like I'll show you pictures of the tires, but like I've been running this front tire on the Druid, on the stump jumper. The rear doesn't have as much use, but like there's still like tire hairs on the main part of the tread, and like it just doesn't deteriorate like you would expect, you know, even a Max Terra to deteriorate. It's clearly a harder compound that is really holding its shape. I've spent most of the time talking about the front tire, but the rear I actually really like. Having that feel isn't as much of a issue, so having those stiff side knobs feels really good. It rolls really quick, and braking is really strong, especially in hard pack. I mean, pretty much in all situations, this tire setup brakes really well. And then the harder compound and whatever they did with the tread pattern, it still rolls incredibly quickly, but then it is still an aggressive tread pattern. So you are still pretty well equipped when the trails get aggressive and you really need to dig in. So it's a bit of an interesting combo in that way. Like, where would I place it? It's like, if you've got like a short to mid travel bike that you want a more aggressive tread pattern in, but kind of like a faster rolling setup and a bit of a lighter casing, like this almost kind of splits the difference between XO Plus and Double Down, and still gives you like a really fast rolling setup with an aggressive tread pattern. So even though I kind of struggle with the front tire and I don't get as much feel, like I'm still kind of happy to run it on this setup, because this is the bike I'm pedaling, I'm doing bigger pedal days on. So I appreciate the lighter tires, and I still feel fairly well equipped for most riding. It just doesn't give me that high level of grip and confidence that I've come to appreciate out of like Maxxis tires, which have, in my opinion, a more confidence-inspiring casing and a higher grip compound, even in the Max Terra. So I don't know. I feel like if this tire was offered in the super soft compound, that might give it a little bit more feel. But as it sits, the casing is a little lighter than I expected, and the compound's a little harder than I expected. And then how they've gone about the tread pattern with this like stiff side knob and more square profile just makes it, in my opinion, a little harder to deal with when you're kind of guessing for traction. You know, maybe traction's there. I just can't feel it. You know, that's what I appreciate most about a tire, is this tire just seems like it's holding its shape and not giving me like much feedback to go off of. I'm just kind of left, you know, being a bit more apprehensive. So I still think there's a place for this tire. Would not be my first choice or second choice for enduro racing. At that point, I'd be looking at the downhill tires. Like, you know, I'm almost like hesitant to even compare this to like Maxxis Double Down, just because the weight is kind of in a lower category. But, you know, from a consumer's perspective, they label it enduro casing soft compound. And honestly, I think a lot of customers could be misled by that. I was certainly kind of misled. Like when I had these tires on my bike, I'm like, man, I feel like these should be better, you know? Like I feel like they're just not geared towards the level of enduro riding that we do on our bikes nowadays. Like honestly, like call the trail casing an XC casing, call the enduro casing a trail casing, come out with a tire in between this and the downhill tire, and then allow super soft on all the casings. And then maybe that'll work. But like right now, I feel like they should relabel this as a trail casing and a hard compound tire, because that's what it is. You know, that's annoying, like as like customer facing, like if you're just going off the nomenclature in the Continental website, you could end up on a tire that you're unhappy with. So maybe that's the biggest piece of this video, is like, it's not a bad tire. I just feel like it's honestly mislabeled. This review obviously doesn't include the downhill tires. I would love to get a chance to try them and put those through the paces, see how they hold up. So maybe I'll do that in a later video. But for now, even though I kind of like ragged on this tire, like I'm actually not taking them off this bike, partly because I don't have any other tires to put on it, but I actually am happy to ride this tire setup for the intended purpose of this bike in the way I'm using it. If I were to take it to, you know, I will feel undergunned on like really aggressive trails that I'm trying to push on, but for 80% of the riding, doing kind of bigger days, I actually do appreciate the faster rolling speed, lighter setup, and then still having like good braking and stuff. I just kind of like deal with a bit less feel and confidence from the tire. So if that's the sacrifice you're willing to make, yeah, it's still a good option in my opinion. I'm rambling at this point. Just keep those things in mind. The soft compound's hard, the enduro casing is light, and the tread pattern acts a little bit differently than your Assegai, even though it looks fairly similar. So that's my 2 cents. Let me know if you have any questions. And yeah, I'll catch you guys in the next video.